Preface. I have tried in this book to write an ecological history of colonial New England. By this I mean a history which extends its boundaries beyond human institutions, economies, class and gender systems, political organizations, cultural rituals, to the natural ecosystems which provide the context for those institutions. Different peoples choose different ways of interacting with their surrounding environments, and their choices ramify through not only the human community but the larger ecosystem as well. Writing a history of such relationships inevitably brings to center stage a cast of non-human characters which usually occupy the margins of historical analysis if they are present in it at all. Much of this book is devoted to evaluating the changing circumstances of such things as pine trees, pigs, beavers, soils, fields of corn, forest watersheds, and other elements of the New England landscape. My thesis is simple. The shift from Indian to European dominance in New England entailed important changes, well known to historians, in the ways these peoples organized their lives, but it also involved fundamental reorganizations, less well known to historians, in the region's plant and animal communities. To the cultural consequences of the European invasion, what historians sometimes call the frontier process, we must add the ecological ones as well. All were connected by complex relationships which require the tools of an ecologist as well as those of a historian to be properly understood. The great strength of ecological analysis in writing history is its ability to uncover processes and long-term changes which might otherwise remain invisible. It is especially helpful in evaluating, as I do here, historical changes in modes of production. In one sense, economy in such an approach becomes a subset of ecology. I have accordingly structured my argument to take best advantage of this analytical strength. I open by contrasting the pre-colonial ecosystems of New England with those that existed at the beginning of the 19th century. I then compare the ecological relationships of pre-colonial Indian communities with those of the arriving Europeans, especially in terms of how the respective groups conceived of owning property and so bounding ecosystems. Having framed the argument with these sets of contrasts, I spend the rest of the book describing the processes of ecological change that followed the Europeans' arrival. My purpose throughout is to explain why New England habitats changed as they did during the colonial period. It is not my intention to rewrite the human history of the region. This is not a history of New England Indians, or of Indian colonial relations, or of the transformation of English colonists from Puritans to Yankees. Indeed, the reader should be careful not to draw the wrong conclusions about these subjects on the basis of my text. Although I attribute much of the changing ecology of New England to the colonists' more exclusive sense of property and their involvement in a capitalist economy, both present to some extent from the 1620s onward, I do not mean to suggest that the nature of the colonial economy underwent no fundamental alterations between 1620 and 1800. It of course did, and some of those alterations, by accentuating tendencies already present, accelerated the processes of ecological change. Equally importantly, the reader must be very clear that the Indians were no more static than the colonists in their activities and organization. When I describe pre-colonial Indian ways of life, I intend no suggestion that these were somehow purer or more Indian than the ways of life Indians chose or were forced into following their contact with colonists. Indians did not define their Indianness solely in terms of ecological relationships, and many of them retained their sense of identity and their resistance to colonialism even after their effective military power and political autonomy had been destroyed. Because I seek primarily to explain ecological change, I devote relatively little attention to the political and military ways in which Europeans subjugated Indian peoples. These are by now, I hope, fairly well known in their broad outline, and I trust that the reader will pursue further reading about them in the books I discuss in the bibliographical essay. Although I have based my argument wherever possible on primary sources, any book of this kind must inevitably rely on the work of other scholars and other disciplines. Marshall Sullins once described interdisciplinary research as the process by which the unknowns of one's own subject are multiplied by the uncertainties